Welcome to Put Your Ears On, a show which concentrates on poetry and on Los Angeles area poets in particular, though I've had guests from elsewhere in the past, such as Jim Mohr from Minnesota. Today it's my honor to present to you a poet I first encountered in Los Angeles, but who moved to New York City many years ago, where she has done quite well. She's had a residency at the McDowell Foundation and has recently won the Hudson Valley Writers Center chapbook contest, and Slappering Hole Press in New York has published her first collection of poems, Bonanza. My guest today is Lynn McGee, who teaches writing in New York City and who I regard as one of my very favorite poets in this country. Lynn, this is your rather wonderful first book, Bonanza, and I'd like you to start the program by reading the title poem from that collection.
Thanks. That was a nice introduction. Okay, so I'll read Bonanza. Some of the poems in the book are based on TV shows that influenced people of my generation.
There's one in there about the Munsters, I noticed, yeah.
Was that one of your favorites?
Yeah.
Okay. Bonanza. They had armchairs fat as hot tubs, staircase tall as a waterfall, but what I waited for was little Joe, even smaller next to head-scratching Hoss, holsters chafing as they swung into saddles, Pa on the front porch, stern as Poseidon, his 3 grown boys sailing the prickly prairie. That club was men only, and their ancient creed stood firm. Guide the ladies' puffy descent from carriages, but clutch your bachelorhood close as cash. Kid without clout, zealous as a runaway, I craved entrance to that fort and that army of brothers, little Joe their weakest link, a man known to wink as bonnets bobbed, part eunuch, part heartthrob, a virgin's ticket west. That's how every guy likes to be described. Part eunuch, part heartthrob.
A certain kind of archetype is evoked there, yes, and invoked.
Right.
When we first met in LA, I remember we sort of, that poem is about television and childhood and transitions. And one of the things we first started talking about was how we both had military backgrounds.
Right.
Your father was in the Army?
He was in the Air Force.
He was in the Air Force, yeah.
He used to brief us.
Brief you?
Yeah, me and my sister, he'd go, come here girls, let me brief you. And then he would brief us about
was he a
what
pilot?
was. Yeah, he still is a pilot.
Really?
He's an old pilot now. He's a pilot, an older pilot, senior pilot.
Does he fly for the Ashland Airlines, you mean?
He flies for corporations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how long was he in the service? You moved around then, just like I did when I was young. Right.
Yeah, 20 years, and we lived in the South, Alabama, Oklahoma, also Hawaii. That's very far south, Hawaii,
right.
And Maryland and Delaware, and then I went to school in Illinois, and then I moved to California, and then I moved to New York about 11 years ago.
Right. Well, you've settled down.
God, I hope so.
Right. Yeah, I know. After I had been moving around when my father was in the Navy for 20 years and moving around as much as I did, it took me about 15 years in LA before I realized, I'd stopped moving. I mean, you get this sensation of moving so much that it takes a long time for that to settle down and to disappear.
But you know what? Momentum Press.
Right.
I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
I think so. The idea that the press that I did.
That's Bill's Press.
Right,
famous LA historical press published a lot of people's first books.
Right. The idea that I think that probably did come out of that, though I hadn't thought of it till now. That sense that I still had a sense of being in motion, even though I'd finally sort of settled down, which I had done for a while.
Right. I thought all grown men wore uniforms till I was about 11. You know, I didn't know.
Just assumed that.
Yeah.
Right. It was a certain color. It was a certain rather bland color too.
Yeah.
Nothing too bright or shiny or.
Right.
Yeah. You have a poem at the beginning of Bonanza, this collection, which focuses on the military, and I thought it was a very powerful poem for me because it summarized both sort of the attraction and the revulsion that one sort of feels for this particular mindset, which is what it is. It's a whole ideological approach to the world, and a physical enactment of that ideology. And I thought this poem dramatically encapsulates that so well that I found myself reading the poem again and again. So I'd love to hear it again.
Okay. Well, this is called Air Show, and there is an announcer's voice in the poem, which is in bold type in the poem. So, Air Show. We can hit any target, anywhere, anytime. Her cheekbones are blazing, white skirt whipping. A bomber dips its wing, darkens the horizon with beehives of smoke. Heat blurs the runways, glittering tar. Card tables wobble with the weight of souvenirs. She fingers the fins on a rusty grenade. Her 3-year-old leans against her. Carry me, carry me. Her husband, stationed in the Gulf, wants a full report. Lawn chairs planted in a jet wing's triangular shade. A man selling programs. His tattoo, a buxom cowgirl riding a torpedo, thighs clamping its shiny, curved sides. Her older boy thumps combat helmets, picks through top pilot trading cards, Desert Storm commemorative coins, coffee table copies of Designation Baghdad. Don't blink, folks, or you'll miss it. F-117 stealth fighter, Darth Vader black, faster than the screech it makes. Look who wants in the show. It's Fat Albert. Stubby T-130, nose up, engine screaming. The young mother nudges her sunburned children to attention. Wind picks up, sirens wail. A golf cart full of cameramen whizzes past, and high above, the Blue Angel jets glint and roar. 2 on the outside, right side up, 2 on the inside, upside down. Clouds rise in welts on creamy blue sky. A man-sized inflatable beer can topples off a table, lands face down and rolls. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot's hometowns, Fayetteville, San Antonio, Tallahassee, San Diego. Her boys kick each other, retreat, and attack. The angels peel off, land, and taxi. Hot metal beaks align. The pilots pop plexiglass hatches, drop to the pavement, and stride toward their fans, adjusting jaunty beige berets, clicking their pens. White uniformed sailors hold back the crowd. The pilots scribble autographs, solemn and quick. Our nation's defense is only as strong as the support it gets from you. Last night, the sitter stayed overnight, let her rest in a motel room, reading mysteries, sleeping late. Today, in tens of thousands, you showed us you care. Last night, till 3, she marked up college catalogs. This morning, threw them out. Now she finds their car, its dashboard scorched. Her smaller boy, assigned the back seat, takes the front. She yanks him by the arm, slams him to the ground. He curls there and sobs. She ties back her hair. Her oldest sits strapped in the sweltering car, reading his program, growling deep in his throat, emitting choppy ammo sounds and whistling like a falling bomb, tracing the pilot's signatures with his finger. So I was kind of thinking a lot about violence, and that it really starts at home, you know. I mean, there's the violence of war, but it's the personalization of violence that we tend to not give as much blame to, and we sort of blame the more abstract concept of violence, you know, that.
Right.
But it's easier to
project it off into some kind of bureaucratic institution that
right.
This is, engendering this kind of activity, whereas in reality, yeah, it does
Right.
start on a very personal, domestic level.
Yeah, peace starts at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, interesting. Even when I hadn't noticed it till this time when you were reading it, but when you announced the names of the cities, the hometowns of the pilots, and right after that, then you have the boys kicking at each other, then retreating. That kind of, and I thought, oh, in a way that sort of these cities become, these boys are become personifications of the cities. That in a sense, that kind of tension or battling among siblings even there, that to try to even say, well, they're from this city or this city, I mean, creates some kind of the juxtaposition of hostility or sibling rivalry right there, which of course then slowly grows and festers. I mean, it sounds so innocent just to say that kind of thing, but in reality, there's something at work there that leads inevitably in some little quiet domino way to the Gulf War.
Yeah,
really.
sure, sure. Well, wars are very sexy, especially when they're on TV.
Yeah, that's as the Pentagon learned, there's ways to market these things, I think. And
well, there always was. I mean, the bumper sticker with the woman riding a torpedo, that 40s image, that things that were painted on the planes, were all about the sexiness of the bombs. And that was one of the things that struck me when you think how far women have come in the military. That's where they were then. They were riding a torpedo in a bikini. That's even if it was a cartoon, that's where they were then. Yes. So.
Right. Have you thought about writing a poem about that pilot who was recently discharged from the, I mean, that's a situation waiting for, I've sort of been trying to work that situation into a poem, a satiric poem inspired by the Latin poet Juvenal, who had these satires that are real interesting.
No, only if I could talk to her.
Only if you could talk to her, right. Well, you did, speaking of that, which makes me think of, you did some journalism work for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I've done I've done whatever. When I was in LA, I used to write for the Reader, the LA Reader, that's still around. And
yeah. Well, actually, not anymore. Just recently, sort of got transformed into something called New Times, I think.
Oh God, that sounds bad. New Times.
Yeah, right.
I don't know about that.
It's backwards looking when something calls itself New Times.
Right.
Yes.
And I did a little bit just for little papers in New York, but mostly I've been focusing on teaching and some museum writing. And when I was in LA, I was a copywriter in advertising, and I dropped out of that to go to graduate school and get an MFA and all that stuff. So, a checkered past.
How about another poem?
Okay. Well, this is kind of related to military stuff in a way. It's about costumes. This is called Incognito and Not. Last Halloween in the village, and that's Greenwich Village. I read this usually in New York. So, last Halloween in the village, I saw half a dozen Jasons, eyes wild behind their hockey masks, cleavers swinging. Women wore cat ears, and even animals walked stiffly in their hats and jackets, sidewalk glazed with egg yolks, shaving cream sliding down phone poles. A long-legged guy in a wedding gown got hounded by a pack of teenage boys who wolf whistled and pitched beer bottles. The big bride hiked his gown and lengthened his stride down the cobblestone street, hard to navigate in heels. His admirers gathered speed. His blonde bouffant bounced. I feared it being yanked off by someone and tossed in the air, falling like an animal. I knifed through the crowd, ready to defend this large-boned beauty, implicated by my own history of disguises. The wig I threw on like a cap, synthetic locks streaming behind me as I raced on my bicycle, my father standing at attention in the driveway, metals cooling on his chest, making other men go rigid with white-gloved salutes, making private parking spaces bubble with oil and anticipation, making me want a costume too. I did wear a wig when I was a kid. I was a blonde kid, and I wore a blonde wig, which I don't know what was. I guess I just wasn't very creative or something. But I write about children a lot too. That's kind of the other theme in this book. There's a lot of growing up stuff and things about kids, and so.
What about the poem about the snake man, so to speak?
Okay, the snake man, so to speak.
Part of your past, which I didn't really discover until about, I'd known you about 5 years. After you moved to New York.
I know, I started to spill my guts in letters to Bill Mohr,
well, we started
which he's now
letters.
sold to UC San Diego, so I've been found out. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, it was, I remember once you wrote me a letter and you mentioned almost in passing something, and so I wrote you a note back and I, question mark, what's this about? And then, so you told me about this particular person you had been involved with. It's a very young person, and and I was very pleased to see it as, I think it's the final poem in the book, isn't it? Yeah, it's a wonderful conclusion to that book. It's a terrific poem.
Well, it kind of blends the childhood, violence, military, costume, all that stuff. I got married at 16 and divorced at 18.
And it wasn't Little Joe.
No, it wasn't. I wish it had been Little Joe. That would have been easier. But it was Little Mike. No. And he had this business. He was just a teenager like me, but he had this business taking reptiles around to schools, and that's how I met him, because he came to my school. I was in 6th grade. No, I was in 10th or 11th grade, I guess. And I was not a happy kid at home and had run away a couple times and wanted out of there. And so, what could infuriate your parents more than to marry at 16 a snake-handling Jew? I was this waspy suburban military kid. Once he was at my house and my father threatened to bodily, hurt him and throw him out. And he looked at him and said, "You lay a hand on me, Colonel McGee, and I'll scratch your face. Try and explain that to your senior officers." And, my heart just, I was like, I'm with you. I don't, wherever you go, I go, So I married him, and he's also a cross-dresser, Okay, now this is the second time I've
done this.
I've confessed this. This is This has been almost 25 years, since this happened. I've been reading poems about it for the last 15 years, and I know people just think I have this kind of, imagination, and they're sort of patronizing about it. I don't want to be remembered as the snake lady, that's my fear, that I'll get pigeonholed.
Right.
But some friends counseled me last night about that, actually, in Ventura, and they said I should.
Well,
so I'll read this poem.
First of all, it won't be the best poem that you ever read in your life. It's a very good poem, but it's not going to be the best poem.
Right, but that's not what people remember. They don't remember your best poem. They remember your most marketable poem.
Well, actually, I do know what you're talking about. I'm stuck with Pancho's Tacos the same way, which was recently torn down by the corner of Lincoln and Ocean Park Boulevard.
Yeah, but that's a good poem.
It's a good poem, but it's not my best poem.
Do you have it with you?
It's the one that people know I don't, and I won't read it, no.
I bet you have it memorized.
But that's what people always go, Pancho's Tacos, and I just go, please.
Well, at least they don't call you Pancho. So, okay, so I'll read this one, Cobra, about that experience.
Right.
I was 17 years old, and I cut my own hair, combed the sand in lizards' cages. My 18-year-old husband lounged in a tight floral dress, my last clean outfit for work. Our apartment reeking of stale eggs, a cave where prey had been dragged and left to rot. Aquariums glowed. Pythons rippled with hunger and tried to climb, creamy bellies pressed to glass. Crocodiles, thick as thighs, sulked in their tubs. It was feeding time, and my young husband rummaged in the freezer, peeled aluminum foil from a fetal-curled rat, offered me a bite. I shattered an ashtray near his feet, hurled the shell of a Ceylonese tortoise. It clattered wildly. My lithe, dark-eyed groom left the room, reappeared with a cobra, and dropped it on the sofa beside me. Black, glossy, indignant, and writhing, The cobra reared up, swayed and tasted the air with its sliver of tongue. My husband stood blocking the television, his wide stance stretching my dress, distorting its orange and yellow flowers. I stared at the taut, translucent triangle between his legs and hated him for ruining my clothes. I imagined calling the ambulance, swaying with the phone's slippery receiver, euphoric and forgiving, dizzy with neurotoxin, my beautiful teenaged husband sobbing, holding up his wrists to be handcuffed, telling the cops how much he loves me. Seconds passed. The cobra moved its neat head back and forth, identifying objects, myself included, by the heat we emitted. I moved my eyes without moving my head, stared at my husband till he free-handed the snake, thumb pressing the top of its head, fingers squeezing its throat, its jaws pink and twisted open as he whipped it from the room. I stayed where I was, cushioned with a new kind of quiet, and felt newly arrived in my body. The steady, expanding lungs a miracle. A vein twitched on the back of my hand. Heat pooled at the back of my neck, beneath the weight of my hair. It was peaceful sitting there. A neighbor's stereo softly thumped. A siren faded as some vehicle gathered distance. I was sleepy all of a sudden, but didn't move till the hall light went out, then the light in the bedroom, aquariums going dark, and the animals still. So,
It is a very fine poem, though, Lynn. But you will be remembered for others.
I hope so. I hope to God.
Actually, one of my favorite poems of yours is one that you may not like that much. That one about vacuum cleaners is really actually a
Oh, yeah. I was just working on that.
Uh-huh.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, you know, I don't know. I might have to take a moment to find it, so maybe I shouldn't.
Well, maybe you should read another one.
Yes, there's a whole appliance series.
All right.
But
I'm into series of poems. I'm working on one now about instructional poems, how to do things.
right.
Like kind of, but they're kind of goofy and surreal, like how to play ping pong with a mirror, that kind of stuff. Why don't you read a couple of short poems?
Okay.
We have time for about 2 short poems, so.
Okay. All right, I'll read this short one about my nephew. Who's autistic. Autism, Children's Ward. He will cut off his own head. He will chew electric cord. He will pick his elfin nose, he claims, till bleeding drains his pulse. He will not be home for Christmas, caught with a shoelace cutting around his neck, rope noose dancing from the swing set. Nurses turn their backs when he unhitches his pants. Puberty, a bully come too soon, shooting out hormones mean as marbles on a slippery floor. He is falling, fighting, falling. The world tipped since birth. His oddity, disability, signed in the calligraphy of feces on a yellow wall. Hinges, bolts, wire, and keys wedged beneath his mattress into radiator ribs and heating ducts, placating his terrible need to hoard. If a school can't educate him, the janitor will. If insurance balks at paying, another hospital lets him go. Before he's discharged, I sleep in his bed at home. Relative come to visit, I leave him a note. You have so many good books. I liked Monster Trucks the best. I did not touch your other things. Sort of all his emotional connection is translated through things.
Right.
So to say I did not touch your other things is a very important thing to say since I stayed in his room.
Right.
You know, but
That they weren't moved at all. Right?
no, I didn't touch them. I literally didn't touch. But
Yeah, I've heard that about autistics. It's you know, they have boundaries are incredibly important.
Yeah.
Right. Do you have any other poems about him by any chance?
Yes. Well, I have a poem about his siblings, kind of, and
Actually, yeah.
do you want me to read Damage?
Yeah. I don't think that's particularly long, is it?
What do you think?
Is
that okay?
Maybe we can finish the program.
Oh, it
with
has the F word in it.
Oh, well.
Well, I'll just say, dying for a.
All right.
Okay. Damage. Sister close in age, nicotine lush in your lungs. Your 4 fierce children peer through torn drapes, eyes silver as ash, teeth glazed with neglect. You allow visits, but warn them not to call my lover aunt. It didn't take a politician to divide us. Staying overnight, your first grader clatters to the floor, clock radio gone berserk, and cries she's been wakened by Rush Limbaugh, a household name. He isn't to blame. When you scream my friends with AIDS deserve dying for a, your arm raised to strike. Wrenching your son's hands from his sister's throat, I feel shame for our early ways. My proud back curled against your fists, tide beating twin beds. I can't locate my youth without finding your shadow, can't measure my age without seeing your face. I am guilty of going first, thinking you unworthy of my friendship, yet longing for our symmetry, fearing I have no home without it. I once moved to a town because you lived there. Now at your kitchen table, I'm distant as a mountain, and I treat your children tenderly as I never treated you. So that's really a poem for his mother. So.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Thanks, Bill.
It's been a real pleasure. This has been Bill Mohr with Put Your Ears On. My guest today was the poet Lynn McGee, reading from her prize-winning book, Bonanza. Thanks very much for joining us. Good evening.